Here, maybe. That's it. Good morning. All right, there we are. Happy Thursday morning.
Good morning.
Let's see if we can find ourselves on here somewhere.
Are you live?
We are live.
Yo, you talk weird. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Feedback.
When I'm live.
We're getting live feedback.
Yeah. If you're watching us, I invite you to input your name and information as usual. Also, if you would share any places you have found hope, beauty, truth, goodness in the world. I'm trying to find a way so I can see your post right now. This is the first time I've done it on this way, so we're doing a little bit different this week. I'm trying to find a way so I can see. Anyways, yep, all right, I think we're good. Joe and Cheryl, good morning. Tammy, good morning. Scott, Bet, Mary. It's not really cold.
I know, but I'm wearing a coat.
We're in the shade a little bit, so it's actually pretty nice. I got a thin sweatshirt on. What's the weather like there, Mary? Samantha, good morning. Raymond, good morning. Yeah, as you guys put your information down, please feel free to share places where you've seen truth, beauty, goodness. Of course, if you haven't met my wife, this is my wife, Molly.
Good morning. Nice to meet you all.
Yes, and so we got a something exciting to share with you all. Good morning, Catherine. Well, there you go, Catherine. Gave away our surprise. Hey, boys, you want to come out here and share? So one of the sort of glory sightings then we have to share with you all is we just added a new member to our family. Monday. No, you've been added already. So you want to bring the new member over?
Yep.
We're going to show off our new family member.
He was napping.
Breezy and cloudy, not really cold. It's actually pretty nice in Durango right now. Oh, careful. You gonna bring him around the other side?
Sure.
Yep. Okay. Whoa. Well, wow, he's kind of got a little wet, huh?
He was in
you want to show him off?
Good nap.
He's in a deep sleep. We wore him out this morning. So this is our new addition to our family. What's his name? Enzo. Brand new right here. So he's brought us a lot of joy and life and work into our family. So yeah. Anyways, thanks, buddy.
You're welcome.
Yeah, put him back to sleep.
So today, well, let me make sure that you're still in the video. No, wrong way. So today, as you guys are sharing about your own glory sightings, places where you found truth, beauty, goodness in the world, we're going to jump in here and we're going to talk about, first of all, if you've been following around along this week, you've found the theme in Matthew 11:28, which is kind of our focus text for this week. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. And there has been a theme of light throughout this week, seeing the light, being the light, finding the light, and all of that. Yes, you will definitely see Enzo around the neighborhood, Tammy. We'll have him out and about for sure. So that is a little bit about the scripture verse. I'm going to end actually reading that from the Message translation because it's actually one of my favorite passages. But today, if you're following along kind of the meditation moments, we're going to focus in on Matthew 8, 5 through 17. And even the text before that, Jesus also heals. But both of these, Jesus brings about healing. First, there's a Roman centurion who comes to Jesus and says, "Would you heal my servant?" And Jesus does so. In fact, the Roman centurion says, "You can do this from here. You don't even need to come into my house." And Jesus says something along the lines of, "I have not found greater faith in all of Israel." Here's a Roman centurion, not even a Jew. And yet Jesus says, "I have not found greater faith than this." So one of the things that stands out to me is this idea. By the way, Molly's here, not just to hold this cute little puppy next to me, but she's going to share here in a little bit about the social gospel. But one of the things that stands out to me right away is this idea that sometimes we find faith in the most unlikely of people and the most unlikely of places. And then after Jesus heals the Roman centurion's servant, he goes into Peter's house and heals Peter's mother-in-law. And so we see this idea of Jesus bringing healing, physical, bodily healing, time and time again. So what's going on here? And in the meditation moment, it talks about this idea of a sort of spiritual individual gospel and a social communal gospel. And I have to say, I grew up in a tradition that taught almost exclusively. I never even learned about this idea of a social gospel or this idea that the gospel really has something to say about society and how societies are formed and how we live on this earth. See, I grew up really with the focus being on a transaction. If I said a prayer, then my individual soul was saved and I would go to heaven when I die. And I think that's part of it. But it misses sometimes the other part. And so today we're going to talk more about a holistic approach to the gospel, what that might mean. We'll wrestle with that. And you guys feel free to share your own experiences or views or thoughts on this idea. So I grew up really with a focus on individual gospel. It was all about my soul. It was all about where I was going to go when I died. And I think that's an important question. We've talked about that before, but that's what salvation meant. That was what the gospel meant to me. And Molly had a different experience. And part of that might be personality too. But you've always kind of been drawn and passionate and focused on this idea of a social gospel. So I thought you might share a little bit.
Sure. You gave me a lot to reflect on why I've kind of had that orientation. It started, maybe it started a young age, and I think maybe part of that is just growing up in a biracial home. Also, not even being born in the United States. I was born in the Middle East, and then spending my summers in the Philippines, and just seeing a lot of different cultures and different kinds of people and religion and poverty and political oppression. And I think through my own experiences that had led me to see the movement of Jesus. Yes, the individual salvation part of it, but also led me to see that Jesus was doing a lot to stand up against the dominant system of his time. And I wouldn't say that came, easily to me. It took many years of just having my eyes turned to see that way. And I think I wanted to share a story today I like to read anthropology. And I guess sometimes, using a story helps illustrate kind of the point I want to make. So I'm just going to summarize it real quick. But basically, there's a doctor and 3 medical anthropologists, and they're all standing by a river. And they hear the final.
This is a story, not a joke?
This is a story.
Okay. 3 anthropologists by a river.
3 anthropologists and a doctor standing on a river, and they're standing on the bank of the river, and they hear the final cries of a drowning man. One doctor jumps into the river after battling against the swift current, and tries to resuscitate the dead man. Then another body come down the stream. Finally, it occurs to one of the anthropologists to head upstream in order to investigate what's going on. And basically, I kind of took that view that we should look upstream and see what kind of systems are in place that are causing, or what's the bigger story? What's going on? Why are all these people coming down the river? Why are they drowning? And yes, we should save the life in front of us, but we should also look upstream and see what's going on. And I take that perspective as a naturopathic doctor as well. There's clearly lots of symptoms in our society of poor health, and I mean poor health like not just physical health, but we can definitely see the symptoms of a sick society. And I think our responsibility, and what even Jesus did, was look upstream and figure out ways and figure out what was going on, the root cause of why these people are drowning, why is there oppression and things like that. And so just over the my years of growing up, I've delved into that, and it's made me want to follow Jesus even in a more deeper way, because his message is super compelling and it's radical, and it's really hard to live by, and I'm challenged by it every single day. And so, yeah, that's a little brief thing about it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there have definitely been times, one moment in particular, where I think I became more aware of a larger, more holistic gospel. And I think we did something called YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and we were in England for 3 months. And we were we did a discipleship training school. There was 11 different people, but we were on a base with roughly 100, a little over 100 people from all over the world. And it was like this colliding of cultures and ethnicities and perspectives, and realizing that Christianity takes on different forms, and there's different views. Drinking is taboo, alcohol in some cultures. And so we would go and we would have dinner with a family from South America, where drinking, really, because it's been abused, I think, by so many in that culture, in that area, it was really a taboo thing. And then we would go over to somebody's house, and they had 3 bottles of wine out for people, and it was just an interesting time to see all of that. But part of that also was, I think, my first real introduction to, I don't always like the word social gospel, but if you've been listening, I use the word more holistic gospel. I really think the individual gospel and the social gospel is a false dichotomy. I think in the West, what we have tended to do is hyper individualize everything. And I think God cares about us as individuals, absolutely. I think that, yeah, God cares about healing individuals. But throughout the scripture, the Hebrew and the Christian in the New Testament, salvation was primarily thought of as a communal salvation. Save us. Even when Jesus rode into Jerusalem, and you hear, or they're waving the palm branches or laying the palm branches down, and they're saying, what is the word they're saying?
Hosanna?
Hosanna, yes. Hosanna. And the pastor can't get it right. Needs some help from the smarter partner here. Lord, save us. It was this understanding we as a community need saving. And if we take then the New Testament seriously, what we see is really a band, a group of people coming together, forming church, not what we think of church today, but really a little house groups. I mean, we might call them house churches today. And there's, by the way, a resurgence of this happening. It's one way we're looking and exploring how do we do this more in Three Springs and start more house churches, and what does that look like in smaller groups? Because I think that's where the deeper formation happens, where we can connect with people and have more intimate relationships. But this is how Christianity began: is people meeting together, selling things, sharing food, breaking bread, praying for each other, meeting in these homes. And there's a lot of interesting things to unpack about that. But that's how Christianity really began to explode, as people coming together and saying, no, this gospel is something radically for all of us to change, to form our lives here and now. And so the idea, I think, of an individual and social gospel is a false dichotomy, I think. And I think in the West, we would do good to look through the lens of other theologies, liberation theology, trying to understand how other people see the world and how the gospel impacts us here and now. Enzo's doing great, by the way. He's like a little baby over here. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
It literally looks like a little kid. So, yeah. Anything else that you wanted to share
Well,
about
just
that?
going back to our experience in YWAM, that was huge for me. I think there's things that happen in your life that you're going one way and then you just kind of head into a different trajectory. And when we went to YWAM and we experienced all those different cultures, and we came in, with one worldview, and then that worldview just kind of butted up against other worldviews. And then on top of that, we understood Christianity in one way, and there was multiple expressions. And then the work that they were doing, going back into the Christian history, one thing that I was really influenced by and radically changed my view about peace and reconciliation was the work that they were doing to basically apologize for the Crusades. And there was a movement of people
That's true.
who were walking basically the path of where the Crusades took place and going to different religious leaders and apologizing for what the Christians did. And I look back at that and I'm like, wow, the Crusades were thousands of years ago, and we're still doing work, right? Because we represented the cross in one way, and it wasn't the way Jesus would have had it. And so that whole experience, working in that setting, just really made me think differently about what is the social gospel. And then as the years have passed, seeing it more holistically, that yes, the individual gospel is just as important, but how do you marry the two? How do you live into both? How does one influence the other, and vice versa? So going back to that, those kind of experiences can really set you on a different trajectory. And if you ever get to have an experience like that, you know what I'm talking about.
You, far before I did, you somehow came across this idea of liberation theology.
Without reading it.
Without reading,
without reading books.
Yeah. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think my experience.
I came years after. I was way late. Anything that I have, she started probably about 5 years earlier. So.
I don't think so. I had a great experience going to the college up here at the Fort. Like I said, I like to read medical anthropology, and it was through medical anthropology I learned a little bit about liberation and structural violence. That was a very new word for me. It's another way to understand how systems are in place, to structural systems that are in place that create oppression. And one thing that stands out to me right now, on top of what we're experiencing with the George Floyd situation is that even with COVID, we're seeing that there is a huge amount of health disparities that the people of color are experiencing. They have higher rates of infection and death. We know that more black women die of birth than white women, and that is a form of structural violence. And so we got to, again, with that holistic mindset, figure out, okay, how individually should I respond, but also how can we as a collective society respond as well? And those choices, they're embedded into each other. How we vote is one thing, but also our day-to-day choices. Um, and and I find that, we're not going to always get it right. Um, I'm sure there's ways that I've been complicit. We've all been complicit. And I think what's important is you remain humble and acknowledge it, and that you continue to have an attitude of curiosity and willing to learn from give space to other people, and even people you disagree with. That's super huge. I think I find that more challenging these days, because I think our human nature sometimes wants to tell people, how they're wrong, what they're doing, and really, and really, there's a place. There is a place to call out injustice, but there is also a place to make space for people to express themselves, and that's a hard tension to hold. But I imagine that is what Jesus did, and I just find the way he did it so compelling, and he did it through parables, and just the way that he lived. And in the end, when the way he died was kind of like the epitome of all that, just laying his life down for another person, for all of us. And so
for a mission,
yeah,
for the gospel.
And that to me is the gospel.
And that kind of comes back, a lot of the stuff Molly was saying here, to the text for today, Matthew 8, this idea that Jesus does care about our physical bodies, that our physical bodies actually are a part. We're a whole being. We're not just a spiritual or physical, but we're interconnected. And Molly, you could say more, I'm sure, maybe at another point, but this idea that even our physical well-being is affected by our stress and our spirituality and our relationships. And so these are all interconnected. It's not an either or, but I think we're becoming more and more aware that they are fully connected, and that the gospel has to be holistic, and that God cares about the fact that some people are dying, are more likely to die because of COVID, and it's affecting certain populations more than others. And I think, as a white person, I think, I hope that our stance would be more of openness and curiosity during this time. And that when we connect with people who think differently, who see differently, who have different experiences, especially people who have different experiences, that we can be open and ask questions, and use that time as a learning. It's if I can set aside my desire, which doesn't always happen, to be right or to argue, if I can just set aside that, and if I'm in a conversation with somebody and can say, tell me more about this, tell me more about this experience, what was this like for you, why do you think this way, what happened as a result of this? If I can try to take that posture, I can walk away from that actually changed, and I think that's a helpful thing. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, feel free to write down any prayer requests that you guys have here. Anything that we as a community can be praying for you.
Ron says hi to our baby seal.
Yep. Thanks, Ron.
Yesterday he was polar bear.
Polar bear. So I'll end with Matthew 11, 28 through 30 from the Message translation. And maybe I invite you to kind of just maybe we'll do a mini Lectio Divina. And so I'll read this through twice, through the Message translation. And if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes right now. Although that won't work if you're going to try to type something. But I would invite you maybe to type if there is a word that stands out while I read this. Feel free to type it in the chat box here. But Matthew 11 in the Message translation, 28 verse 30 says this: Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So if there is a phrase that stands out to you, I invite you to put that in the chat box. And I'll read it through one more time, and maybe there's a personal invitation for you as we read this. In light of everything that's going on in the world right now, what do you feel invited into from this text? You can write specifically, it can trigger something as I read this about something else, but an invitation that you feel. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me, and watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I would say, for me, even in the midst of all this, especially in the midst of all this, I feel tired. I think it's easy for me to check out, and I feel the invitation for me is to stay checked in, to stay curious, to ask those questions, to stay interested, because that is the invitation that Jesus calls us and invites us into, is an invitation not just for our own individual healing, but for a global healing. And God's heart is not just for me, but for all. And when all are hurting, God's heart is hurting. So I invite you, we'll kind of wrap up here, but to share, if you wouldn't mind, what stands out to you and what invitation you have. I see some people are starting to post things already, and we'll continue to follow along my comment section because I think we're a couple moments delayed. But until next time, our little Enzo here will sign off, and we'll see you guys